The dust swirled like a merciless demon across the barren plains of Wyoming Territory. 1877. As Gabriella Thorne clutched her tattered shawl tighter around her shoulders and forced one foot in front of the other. Her parched lips cracked with each labored breath, the blisters on her feet bursting with every determined step toward a horizon that seemed to mock her very existence. Blood seeped through the worn leather of her boots as Gabriella trudged onward. 3 days without proper rest, 2 days with barely a sip of water, and a week since she'd fled the burning remains of her family's homestead. The Thorne Ranch was nothing more than ash and painful memories now, claimed by the same ruthless men who'd taken her parents' lives while she hid in the root cellar, listening to her mother's final screams. Just a little further, she whispered to herself, though her body screamed in protest. The setting sun painted the vast landscape in hues of amber and crimson, a beautiful scene that Gabriella was too exhausted to appreciate. Her vision blurred, dark spots dancing before her eyes as the world began to tilt. She didn't feel the impact when her knees hit the ground, didn't register the soft moan that escaped her lips as she pitched forward. Consciousness slipped away like water through cupped hands, and Gabriella welcomed the darkness, a brief respite from the relentless agony of her journey. The rhythmic sound of hoofbeats penetrated the fog of her unconsciousness, growing louder as they approached. Had they found her? Had the men who murdered her family tracked her this far? Gabriella tried to rise to run, but her limbs refused to cooperate. Whoa there, midnight. The deep voice cut through her panic, followed by the creak of leather as someone dismounted. Rough hands, gentle in their touch, turned her over. Through half-lidded eyes, Gabriella caught a glimpse of a weathered face beneath the brim of a wide hat, concern etched into features hardened by sun and wind. "Miss, can you hear me, miss?" The voice was deep, tinged with worry. Gabriella tried to respond, but her parched throat produced only a raspy wheeze. The man lifted her head carefully, pressing a canteen to her cracked lips. The lukewarm water was the sweetest thing she'd ever tasted. "Easy now," he cautioned as she gulped greedily. "Too much too fast will make you sick." When she'd had her fill, the stranger assessed her with intense eyes the color of the summer sky. "You're in a bad way, miss. My ranch is about an hour's ride from here. Can you hold on that long?" Gabriella managed a weak nod, though she wasn't certain she could remain conscious for another minute, let alone an hour. With surprising gentleness for hands so calloused, the cowboy lifted her from the ground as if she weighed nothing, cradling her against his broad chest. The steady beat of his heart beneath her ear was oddly comforting. "I've got you now," he murmured, mounting his horse with Gabriella secure in his arms. "You're safe, little one. You're mine to protect now." Through the haze of pain and exhaustion, something in those words penetrated Gabriella's consciousness. Not possession, but promise. A vow of safety when she'd thought herself utterly alone in the world. As the horse began to move beneath them, Gabriella surrendered once more to unconsciousness, lulled by the rhythmic motion and the security of strong arms holding her steady. Yates Blackwood had not expected to find a half-dead woman on his way back from Timber Creek. The small town served as the closest supply point to his modest ranch, and he'd made the journey to purchase necessities that would see him through another month of solitude. Solitude was what Yates preferred these days. After the war, after losing his family's Texas ranch to corrupt officials, after watching good men die for causes that seemed increasingly meaningless, he'd retreated to Wyoming Territory to live on his own terms, answerable to no one. Yet here he was, a woman in his arms, her life quite literally in his hands. She was young, perhaps 22 or 23, with hair the color of wheat fields at harvest. Despite the dirt and blood marring her face, Yates could see she was beautiful, though that fact registered as merely incidental compared to her dire condition. "Hang on, miss," he said, though he doubted she could hear him. "We're almost there." Blackwood Ranch came into view as they crested a small rise, a modest cabin with a barn and corral, nestled against the protective embrace of a stand of pines. It wasn't much compared to the sprawling Texas estate he'd grown up on, but it was his, free and clear. His ranch hand, an older man named Samuel who'd followed Yates from Texas, emerged from the barn at the sound of approaching hooves. "Mr. Blackwood, what in tarnation?" Samuel's eyes widened at the sight of the woman in Yates's arms. "Found her collapsed about an hour's ride east," Yates explained, dismounting carefully to avoid jostling his precious cargo. "She's in bad shape, Sam. Fetch some clean water and bandages, and ask Clara to come up from her cabin." Clara was Samuel's wife, who lived with him in a small cabin down the hill. She had been a nurse during the war, and her skills had proven invaluable more than once. Yates carried the unconscious woman into his cabin, laying her gently on his bed. In the light of the oil lamps, he could better assess her condition. Her dress was torn and dirty, her boots nearly worn through. Dried blood crusted around blisters on her heels and ankles. Her face, despite the grime, showed signs of several days' exposure to the elements. Clara bustled in moments later, her gray hair escaping its tight bun, medical bag in hand. "Lord have mercy," she breathed, taking in the sight. "What happened to her?" "Don't know," Yates replied, stepping back to give Clara room to work. "Found her collapsed on the prairie." "She's dehydrated, exhausted," Clara said, examining the young woman with practiced hands. "These feet need immediate attention before infection sets in. I need to get her out of these filthy clothes." Yates nodded. "I'll wait outside. Call if you need anything." On the porch, he lit a cigarette, inhaling deeply as he gazed at the stars emerging in the darkening sky. What had driven this woman to walk until her body simply gave out? Who was she running from or to? The questions circled in his mind like buzzards over a carcass. An hour later, Clara emerged, wiping her hands on her apron. "She'll live," the older woman announced. "I've cleaned and dressed her wounds, got some water into her. She's feverish but not dangerously so. The poor thing is simply exhausted beyond measure." "Did she wake at all? Say anything?" Clara shook her head. "Not a word, though she stirred a bit during the worst of the cleaning. Those feet of hers tell a story of miles walked without proper rest." She fixed Yates with a stern look. "She needs time to heal, Mr. Blackwood, several days at least." "She can have all the time she needs," Yates replied, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "I've put her in one of my nightgowns," Clara continued. "I'll come back in the morning to check on her. There's broth warming on the stove if she wakes hungry." After Clara left, Yates returned inside, pulling a chair beside the bed. The woman looked different now, clean, her golden hair spread across his pillow, her face peaceful in sleep. One of her hands lay atop the quilt, and Yates noted the calluses that spoke of hard work, at odds with the delicate structure of her fingers. He should get some sleep himself. There would be work to do at first light regardless of their unexpected guest, but Yates found himself reluctant to leave her side. What if she woke disoriented, frightened to find herself in a strange place? What if her fever worsened in the night? "Who are you?" he whispered to the sleeping woman. "And what demons drove you to such desperation?" The night deepened around the small cabin as Yates maintained his vigil, the questions multiplying with each passing hour. Gabriella surfaced slowly from the depths of unconsciousness, awareness returning in fragments. The softness beneath her, the absence of pain in her feet, the clean scent of soap on her skin, the unfamiliar ceiling above her. Memory crashed back the endless walking, the collapse, the cowboy lifting her from the ground. She bolted upright, heart hammering against her ribs, only to find herself alone in a small, neat bedroom. Sunlight streamed through curtained windows, illuminating simple furnishings. The bed where she lay, a dresser, a washstand with a porcelain basin. She was wearing a nightgown that wasn't her own, her feet bandaged with clean white strips of cloth. The door opened, and Gabriella tensed, pulling the quilt to her chin as a woman entered, older, with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair. "Good morning, dear," the woman said, her voice warm with genuine relief. "I'm Clara. It's good to see those eyes open at last. Where am I?" Gabriella's voice emerged as a rasp, her throat still raw. "Blackwood Ranch," Clara explained, pouring water from a pitcher into a cup. "Mr. Yates found you collapsed yesterday evening and brought you here." She handed Gabriella the water. "Drink slowly now." Gabriella sipped obediently, the cool liquid soothing her parched throat. "Mr. Yates, Yates Blackwood, this is his ranch," Clara smiled. "He's been worried sick about you. Hardly left your side all night until I shooed him out to tend his chores this morning." The memory of strong arms cradling her, of a deep voice promising protection, surfaced in Gabriella's mind. "He saved my life." "That he did." Clara sat on the edge of the bed. "Now, if you're feeling up to it, I'd like to check your feet and get some broth into you. Then perhaps you might tell us who you are and what happened to leave you in such a state." As Clara unwrapped the bandages, revealing raw, blistered skin that had been cleaned and treated with salve, Gabriella gathered her thoughts. These people had saved her life, cared for her without knowing who she was. They deserved the truth, or at least part of it. "My name is Gabriella Thorne," she began, wincing as Clara applied fresh salve to her wounds. "My family had a homestead about 50 miles east of here." "Had." Clara's hands paused in their work. Gabriella swallowed hard. "Raiders came a week ago. They burned everything, killed my parents." The words emerged flat, emotionless. She'd not yet allowed herself to truly feel the loss. "I hid. When they left, I started walking. I was hoping to reach Timber Creek, find the sheriff there." Clara's eyes softened with compassion. "I'm so sorry, child. Such terrible things happen in these territories." She finished bandaging Gabriella's feet. "But you're safe now. You need to rest, heal." "I can't stay," Gabriella protested weakly. "Those men, they might still be looking for me. I was the only witness." "All the more reason to stay put until you're stronger," Clara countered firmly. "You won't get far on these feet, and Mr. Blackwood's ranch is remote enough. Few know of its existence." Before Gabriella could argue further, the door opened again, and the man himself entered, tall and broad-shouldered, with intense blue eyes that seemed to see straight through her. His dark hair was damp, as if he'd just washed, and he'd removed his hat upon entering, holding it respectfully at his side. "You're awake," he said, relief evident in his voice. "Welcome back to the land of the living, Miss Thorne," Gabriella supplied. "Gabriella Thorne." "And I owe you my life, Mr. Blackwood." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Yates, please, and you owe me nothing. Any decent man would have done the same." But they both knew that wasn't true. The frontier was a hard place, and many would have ridden past a stranger in distress, unwilling to take on another's problems. "Clara tells me you've had some broth," he continued. "Do you think you could manage something more substantial? I've just finished making breakfast." The mention of food made Gabriella's stomach growl audibly, bringing a flush to her cheeks. "That would be wonderful, thank you. I'll bring a tray," he said, turning to leave before pausing at the door. "Miss Thorne, I'm glad you're still with us." After he left, Gabriella caught Clara watching her with a knowing look. "What?" she asked, self-conscious. "Nothing, dear," Clara replied, rising from the bed. Just noticing that Mr. Blackwood seems quite taken with you. In the 3 years I've known him, I've never seen him so attentive. He's simply being kind to someone in need, Gabriella protested. Clara's smile deepened. Perhaps, but kindness from Yates Blackwood is a rare gift indeed. He's a good man, but one who keeps the world at arm's length. She moved toward the door. Rest now, I'll be back to check on you later. Left alone, Gabriella sank back against the pillows, trying to make sense of her situation. A week ago, she'd had a family, a home, a future planned out before her. Now she was alone, dependent on the charity of strangers, with nothing to her name but the clothes she'd been wearing, clothes that, she realized, were nowhere to be seen. Yates returned with a tray laden with eggs, bacon, and biscuits still warm from the oven. The aroma made Gabriella's mouth water. "I wasn't sure what you might like," he said, setting the tray across her lap. "It looks wonderful," she assured him, suddenly ravenous. "I haven't had a proper meal in days." He pulled the chair closer to the bed, watching as she ate with barely restrained hunger. "Clara mentioned what happened to your family," he said quietly. "I'm sorry for your loss." Gabriella paused, a fork halfway to her mouth. "Thank you. Do you have other family? Someone I could send word to?" She shook her head. "No one. My father's people are back east, but we haven't had contact in years, not since he married my mother. They didn't approve." The bitterness in her voice was unmistakable. "What will you do when you're recovered?" It was the question Gabriella had been avoiding. "I don't know," she admitted. "I had planned to reach the sheriff in Timber Creek, report what happened, but—" She set down her fork. "The men who attacked our farm, they work for Jeremiah Caldwell." Yates's expression darkened. "Caldwell Land Company," Gabriella nodded. "My father refused to sell our water rights to them. 3 days later they came." She looked down at her plate, appetite suddenly gone. "The sheriff in Timber Creek, I've heard he's in Caldwell's pocket. I doubt he'd help me." A muscle ticked in Yates's jaw. "You've heard right. Sheriff Daniels looks the other way when it comes to Caldwell's business dealings." He stood, pacing the small room. "But there's a federal marshal who passes through every few months. Incorruptible sort. If we could get your testimony to him." "They'd kill me first," Gabriella said flatly. "I recognize 2 of them. They'd never let me testify. Then we keep you safe until we can figure something out." Yates's tone brooked no argument. "You'll stay here, recover your strength. No one outside of Clara and Samuel knows you're here, and they can be trusted completely." Gabriella wanted to protest, to insist she couldn't impose, couldn't put him in danger. But the truth was, she had nowhere else to go, no resources, and her body was too damaged to travel. "Thank you," she said instead, the words wholly inadequate for the magnitude of his offer. Yates nodded, seemingly uncomfortable with her gratitude. "You should rest. Doctor from town will be out tomorrow to look at those feet properly." He collected the tray, pausing at the door. "If you need anything at all, just call. I won't be far." After he left, Gabriella sank back against the pillows, exhaustion claiming her once more despite having just woken. As she drifted toward sleep, she found herself wondering about the solitary rancher who had saved her life, the man whose bed she now occupied. There was a story there. She was certain, pain etched into the lines around his eyes, a wariness in the set of his shoulders. Perhaps, during her convalescence, she would discover what ghosts haunted Yates Blackwood's past. The next week passed in a blur of sleep, healing, and gradually increasing strength. The doctor, a gruff but competent man named Ellis, had examined Gabriella's feet and pronounced them on the mend, though he warned it would be at least another week before she should attempt walking. Confined to bed, Gabriella initially chafed at the restriction, unused to idleness. But Yates proved an unexpected source of distraction, bringing her books from his modest library, sitting with her in the evenings to play cards or simply talk. She learned he had fought for the Confederacy, though he spoke of it reluctantly and with no trace of pride. That he had lost his family's ranch in the aftermath, to men with papers and no conscience, as he put it. That he had come to Wyoming Territory 5 years ago to start over, bringing only Samuel and Clara, former slaves from a neighboring plantation who had nowhere else to go after the war. They could have left, Yates explained one evening as they sat playing gin rummy, Gabriella propped up in bed while he occupied the chair beside it. God knows they had reason to want nothing more to do with a Southern man, but Samuel said we were all starting over, might as well do it together. They seem to care for you a great deal, Gabriella observed, arranging her cards. They're the closest thing to family I have left, he admitted. Though I suspect Clara stays mostly because she doesn't trust me to feed myself properly. That startled a laugh from Gabriella, a sound that seemed to surprise them both. It was the first time she'd laughed since before the attack. Yates smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. That's a sound I wouldn't mind hearing more of around here. Heat rose to Gabriella's cheeks, and she focused intently on her cards. "Gin," she announced, laying down her hand. Yates groaned good-naturedly. "That's 3 in a row. I'm beginning to think you were a card sharp in a previous life, Miss Thorne." "My father taught me," she said, the memory bittersweet. "He always said a woman should know how to win at cards and shoot straight useful skills for frontier life." "Wise man," Yates commented, gathering the cards to shuffle. "Could you? Shoot straight, I mean," Gabriella nodded. "Pa made sure of it, said he wouldn't always be around to protect me," her voice caught. "Turns out he was right about that." Yates's hand covered hers briefly, a gesture of comfort that sent warmth spreading up her arm. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to bring up painful memories." "Everything is a painful memory right now," she admitted. "But I can't hide from them forever." They sat in companionable silence as Yates dealt another hand. Outside, the wind whistled around the eaves of the cabin, carrying the first hint of autumn's approach. "When you're well enough to walk," Yates said suddenly, "would you like to see the rest of the ranch? It's not much, but the view from the North Ridge is something special." The invitation hung between them, weighted with meaning beyond the simple words. It suggested a future, however brief, that included her presence at Blackwood Ranch. "I'd like that," Gabriella replied softly. Their eyes met over the cards, and something shifted in the air between them, an acknowledgement of growing feelings neither was ready to name. The moment was broken by a knock at the door. Clara entered with a tray of tea and biscuits, her knowing gaze taking in their proximity. "Thought you might like a little something before bed," she said innocently, though her eyes twinkled with mischief. "Thank you, Clara," Yates said, rising from his chair. "I should check on the horses before turning in anyway." After he left, Clara busied herself arranging the tea things, humming tunelessly under her breath. "You might as well say whatever it is you're thinking," Gabriella said, amused despite herself. Clara's smile was warm as summer sunshine. "Just thinking it's been a long time since I've seen that man look at anyone the way he looks at you, Miss Gabriella. He feels responsible for me, that's all." "If that's what you need to tell yourself," Clara replied, pouring tea into delicate cups that seemed at odds with the rustic cabin. "But I've known Yates Blackwood long enough to recognize when he's smitten, whether he admits it to himself or not." Gabriella accepted the tea, warming her hands around the cup. "Even if that were true, and I'm not saying it is, I can't stay here indefinitely. I'm putting everyone at risk just by being here. Risk is part of living, child." Clara sat on the edge of the bed. "And that man out there. He's been half alive since the war, just going through the motions. Until he brought you home. Clara, I'm not saying you should throw yourself into his arms, the older woman continued, patting Gabriella's hand. Just that maybe, when you're making your plans, you might consider that some things happen for a reason. She rose, smoothing her apron. Now drink your tea and get some rest. Dr. Ellis says you might try standing tomorrow if those feet look good. After Clara left, Gabriella sipped her tea thoughtfully, gazing out the window at the star-filled sky. In the week since Yates had found her, she'd thought primarily of survival, of healing enough to move on. But move on to what? She had no home, no family, and the men who destroyed her life were still out there. And then, there was Yates himself, quiet, honorable, and increasingly important to her in ways she hadn't anticipated. She found herself looking forward to their conversations, watching for the rare smile that transformed his serious face, feeling a flutter in her chest when their hands accidentally touched. It was too soon, too complicated, too dangerous to contemplate anything beyond friendship. And yet, Gabriella set aside her empty cup and extinguished the lamp, letting darkness envelop the room. As she drifted toward sleep, her thoughts kept returning to Yates, to the gentleness of his hands as he'd lifted her from the dirt, to the unwavering protection he'd offered a stranger, to the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. Perhaps, she thought as sleep claimed her, Clara wasn't entirely wrong after all. The morning brought a crisp clarity to the air, the kind that hinted at summer's end despite the lingering heat of day. Gabriella woke feeling stronger than she had since arriving at Blackwood Ranch, determined that today would be the day she'd stand on her own feet again. Clara arrived shortly after breakfast with fresh bandages and her usual cheerful efficiency. "Let's have a look at those feet," she said, setting her supplies on the bedside table. As she unwrapped the bandages, Gabriella was heartened to see the improvement. The raw, blistered skin had begun to heal, the angry redness fading to pink. "Much better," Clara pronounced, applying a fresh layer of salve. "I think we can try having you stand today, just for a minute or two, but no walking yet. Those new layers of skin are still too fragile." After rebandaging her feet, Clara helped Gabriella swing her legs over the side of the bed. "Ready?" she asked, offering her sturdy arm for support. Gabriella nodded, bracing herself. With Clara's help, she slowly rose to a standing position, wincing as her weight settled on her tender feet. Pain shot up from her heels, but it was bearable, nothing like the searing agony she'd endured during those last miles before collapse. "How does it feel?" Clara asked, watching her face carefully. "Like I'm standing on pins and needles," Gabriella admitted, "but I can manage it." She remained standing for nearly a minute before the discomfort grew too intense, and Clara helped her back onto the bed. "That's wonderful progress," the older woman said encouragingly. "A few more days and you'll be taking your first steps. Though I still want you resting those feet as much as possible." "I'm going stir-crazy in this room," Gabriella confessed. "I'm used to being active, working from sunup to sundown." Clara considered this. "Well, I don't see why you couldn't sit on the porch for a while, get some fresh air. I'll have Samuel bring a comfortable chair out there after lunch." The prospect of leaving the confines of the bedroom, even just for the porch, lifted Gabriella's spirits considerably. "Thank you, Clara, for everything you've done." "No need for thanks, child. It's a pleasure to have another woman around. These men would live like wild animals if left to their own devices." She packed up her supplies with a smile. "Besides, you've been good for Mr. Blackwood. He smiled more this past week than in the 3 years prior." Before Gabriella could formulate a response to this observation, Clara was gone, leaving her to contemplate the older woman's words. Was it possible that she affected Yates as deeply as he was beginning to affect her? The thought lingered as Samuel helped her to a cushioned chair on the porch after lunch, arranging a small table beside her with books, water, and a bell to ring if she needed anything. "Miss Clara says you're to keep those feet elevated," he instructed, placing a padded stool beneath her legs. "And not to even think about trying to walk on your own yet." "I promise," Gabriella assured him, settling into the chair with a contented sigh. The view from the porch was magnificent, rolling grasslands stretching toward distant mountains, a small creek winding through the property, cattle grazing peacefully in a meadow below. "It's beautiful here," she said softly. Samuel nodded, pride evident in his weathered face. "Mr. Blackwood chose well when he bought this land. Reminds him a bit of home, I think, though he'd never admit to being homesick for Texas." "How long have you known him?" "Since he was born," Samuel replied, leaning against the porch railing. "I worked for his father before him. Saw that boy grow from a squalling infant to a man." A shadow crossed his face. "Saw what the war did to him, too. Changed him like it changed so many." "He doesn't talk much about that time," Gabriella observed. "No, he wouldn't. Carries those memories close, does Mr. Blackwood." Samuel straightened, adjusting his hat. "Well, I'd best get back to work. Mr. Blackwood's out checking the north pasture fence line. Should be back before supper." Left alone on the porch, Gabriella closed her eyes, letting the afternoon sun warm her face. The peaceful surroundings were a balm to her battered spirit, a stark contrast to the horror and desperation of the past weeks. For the first time since the attack, she allowed herself to fully feel the grief of losing her parents, the devastation of losing her home. Tears slipped silently down her cheeks as she mourned not only what she had lost, but what could never be again: her mother's laugh, her father's steady presence, the security of knowing exactly where she belonged in the world. The creak of saddle leather roused her from her reverie. Opening her eyes, she saw Yates dismounting from his black stallion, leading the horse toward the barn. He paused when he spotted her on the porch, changing direction to approach her instead. Hastily, Gabriella wiped away her tears, though she knew her reddened eyes would betray her. "Miss Thorne," he greeted her, removing his hat as he climbed the porch steps. "It's good to see you up and about." His eyes narrowed as he noticed her tear-streaked face. "Are you all right? Are you in pain?" "No, nothing like that," she assured him, attempting a smile. "Just thinking about my parents. It hits me sometimes when I least expect it." Understanding softened his features. "Grief has its own timetable. It comes in waves, recedes, then crashes over you again when you think you're standing on solid ground." "You sound like you speak from experience," Gabriella observed quietly. Yates settled into the chair beside hers, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "Lost my younger brother at Gettysburg. My mother to illness the year after, my father. He never recovered from either loss. Drank himself to death within 2 years of the war's end." "I'm sorry," Gabriella said, the words inadequate for such profound loss. He acknowledged her sympathy with a slight nod. "Time dulls the edges, but some wounds never fully heal. You just learn to live with them." They sat in companionable silence as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "How do the feet feel?" Yates asked eventually. "Better. Clara let me stand for a minute this morning." His smile was genuine, warming his eyes. "That's progress. Soon you'll be running circles around us all." "I doubt that," Gabriella laughed. "But I'd settle for being able to walk to the creek and back without assistance. All in good time." Yates hesitated, then added, "There's no rush, you know. You're welcome to stay as long as you need." The offer hung between them, weighted with unspoken possibilities. "That's very generous," Gabriella replied carefully, "but I can't impose indefinitely. And there's still the matter of the men who killed my parents." They're out there, working for Caldwell, probably thinking I'm dead in the wilderness. Yates's expression darkened. Caldwell's land grabbing has gone unchecked for too long. His men operate with impunity because no one stands against them. My father did, Gabriella said softly. And it cost him everything. One man alone is easy to silence. Yates leaned forward, his voice intense. But with evidence, with testimony yours and perhaps others who have suffered at Caldwell's hands, the territorial governor might be persuaded to intervene. Hope flared briefly in Gabriella's chest, quickly tempered by reality. Even if that were possible, I'd be putting a target on my back. Caldwell's men would come for me the moment they learned I was alive and talking to authorities. Not if you had protection. Yates's gaze held her steadily. Not if you weren't alone. The implication was clear, and it sent Gabriella's heart racing. Was he offering more than temporary shelter, more than assistance with her testimony? Before she could formulate a response, Samuel appeared at the porch steps. Mr. Blackwood, there's a problem at the north fence line. Looks like someone cut through the wire. Found tracks heading toward the upper pasture. Yates was on his feet instantly, tension radiating from his body. Rustlers, maybe, or could be Caldwell's men looking to cause trouble. They've been pushing boundaries all over the county lately. Yates's gaze flicked to Gabriella, concern evident in his eyes. Get Miss Thorne back inside. Clara, too. Lock the doors. He turned to Gabriella. Stay away from the windows. If anyone comes who isn't me or Samuel, there's a shotgun under the bed. Yates, she began, alarmed by the sudden shift in atmosphere. It's probably nothing, he said, his tone belying his words. Just a precaution. I'll be back before dark. He strode toward the barn, Samuel following close behind. Minutes later they rode out, rifles across their saddles, heading toward the northern boundary of the property. Clara appeared in the doorway, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced by grim efficiency. Let's get you inside, Miss Gabriella. No sense taking chances. As Clara helped her back to the bedroom, Gabriella couldn't shake the feeling that her past was catching up to her, that by staying at Blackwood Ranch, she might have brought danger to the doorstep of the man who had saved her life. The afternoon stretched into evening with no sign of Yates or Samuel. Clara busied herself preparing supper, though her frequent glances toward the window betrayed her anxiety. Gabriella sat at the kitchen table, a blanket around her shoulders against the growing chill, watching as shadows lengthened across the yard. They should have been back by now, she said, voicing the concern they both felt. Clara nodded, her hands never pausing in their work. Samuel knows this land like the back of his hand. If there's trouble, he'll get Mr. Blackwood home safe. What if it's Caldwell's men? Gabriella's voice dropped to a whisper. What if they track me here somehow? Impossible, Clara declared firmly. No one saw Yates bring you here. No one's been to the ranch since, except Dr. Ellis, and he's known the family for years. Trustworthy as they come. Yet doubt gnawed at Gabriella. Caldwell's reach was long, his resources considerable. If he'd discovered she'd survived the attack on her family's homestead. The sound of hoofbeats brought both women's attention to the window. Clara peered cautiously through the curtains, her body sagging with relief. It's them, she confirmed. Both of them, thank the Lord. Gabriella's relief was short-lived. As the men entered the cabin, the grim set of Yates's jaw and the blood staining his shirt told their own tale. What happened? Clara demanded, already moving to fetch her medical supplies. Ambush, Samuel replied tersely. 3 men waiting in the brush near the cut fence. Got off a shot before we spotted them. You're hurt, Gabriella said, rising instinctively before remembering her injured feet. She sank back into her chair, feeling helpless. Just grazed, Yates dismissed, though the tight lines around his mouth suggested otherwise. Bullet caught me along the ribs. Nothing serious. I'll be the judge of that, Clara said, returning with her medical bag. Shirt off, Mr. Blackwood. Now. With a resigned sigh, Yates complied, wincing as he peeled the bloodied fabric away from his skin. Gabriella caught her breath at the sight of his bare torso, not just at the angry red furrow along his right side where the bullet had grazed him, but at the map of old scars that told the story of a life lived hard. Clara cleaned the wound efficiently, confirming it was indeed superficial, though it clearly pained him. As she applied a bandage, Samuel filled in the details of their encounter. They wore bandanas over their faces, but one of them, the leader, I recognized his voice. Works for Caldwell. Fellow named Tucker, mean piece of work. Gabriella's blood ran cold. Jesse Tucker, tall man, scar through his eyebrow, Samuel nodded grimly. That's him. He was there, Gabriella whispered, her hands beginning to tremble. At my parents' farm. He was one of the men who... She couldn't finish the sentence. Yates's expression hardened. You're certain, she nodded, memories flooding back with sickening clarity. I'd know his voice anywhere. He was giving the orders when they set fire to our barn. A heavy silence fell over the room as the implications settled around them. If Tucker was involved in both the attack on the Thorne homestead and today's ambush at Blackwood Ranch, it couldn't be coincidence. How did they find me? Gabriella asked, her voice small. They might not have, Yates replied, pulling on a clean shirt that Clara handed him. Could be they were just causing trouble, looking to steal some cattle. Caldwell's been pushing boundaries all over the county lately. But none of them believed the explanation, not really. The timing was too convenient, the connection to Tucker too direct. What do we do now? Clara asked, packing away her medical supplies. We prepare, Yates said simply. Double the watches. Keep firearms close at hand. And tomorrow, I ride to Timber Creek to send a telegraph to the territorial governor. If Caldwell's men are getting bold enough to attack established ranches, it's time the authorities took notice. What about Miss Gabriella? Samuel asked. If they know she's here. I should leave, Gabriella said firmly. I've brought enough trouble to your door already. Absolutely not, Yates countered, his tone brooking no argument. Your feet still aren't healed enough for travel, and even if they were, where would you go? Caldwell's men control the territory for 50 miles in every direction. I won't have you putting yourselves in danger for me, Gabriella insisted. Your blood is already on my hands. Yates moved to her side, kneeling despite the pain it clearly caused him, bringing his face level with hers. Listen to me, Gabriella. What happened today, what happened to your family, that's on Caldwell and his men, not you. Never you. His use of her given name, the intensity in his blue eyes, the proximity of his body to hers, it all combined to steal Gabriella's breath. She could see every detail of his face this close. The faint scar along his jawline, the flecks of gray in his otherwise blue eyes, the day's growth of beard shadowing his strong chin. I can't lose anyone else, she whispered, her voice breaking. Not because of me. You won't, he promised, his hand finding hers, strong fingers entwining with her own. But I'm not sending you away, Gabriella. Not now. Not ever, unless it's what you truly want. The declaration hung between them, weighted with meaning beyond the immediate danger. In his eyes, Gabriella saw not just determination, but something deeper, something that made her heart race and her cheeks flush. Clara cleared her throat softly, reminding them they weren't alone. Yates straightened, though his hand lingered on Gabriella's for a moment longer before releasing it. Samuel and I will take turns standing watch tonight, he said, his voice returning to its usual practical tone. Clara, you stay with Miss Thorne. Keep the shotgun close. As the household settled into their tense new reality, Gabriella found sleep elusive despite her physical exhaustion. The events of the day circled in her mind: the ambush, Tucker's involvement, the unspoken something growing between her and Yates. From her bed, she could hear the occasional creak of floorboards as Yates moved around the cabin, keeping his vigil. The knowledge that he was there, standing guard over her safety, brought both comfort and a deep, aching worry. He had already risked so much for her, a woman he'd known barely a week. And now he was prepared to risk more, to stand against Caldwell and his men, all to protect her. As moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting silver patterns across the bed covers, Gabriella made a silent vow. Whatever came next, she would not be a passive participant in her own fate. Her feet were healing. Soon she would be mobile again. And when that day came, she would find a way to end the threat to those she was coming to care for deeply, even if it meant confronting her past and the men who had destroyed it. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, autumn's approach evident in the golden light that spilled across the land. Gabriella woke to the smell of coffee and the low murmur of voices from the kitchen. Pushing herself to a sitting position, she tested her feet against the cool wooden floor, pleased to find the pain had diminished further overnight. With careful movements, she stood, balancing against the bedpost. The pins and needles sensation remained, but it was bearable now, more discomfort than true pain. Taking a tentative step, then another, Gabriella made her way slowly to the chest where Clara had stored the clothing they'd acquired for her, simple garments borrowed from a neighbor's daughter. According to Clara, though Gabriella suspected they might have been purchased new in Timber Creek. By the time she had dressed herself in a modest blue calico dress, her confidence in her mobility had grown. She wouldn't be running any time soon, but walking short distances seemed possible now. The conversation in the kitchen fell silent as she appeared in the doorway, 3 pairs of eyes turning to her in surprise. "Miss Gabriella," Clara exclaimed, rising from her chair, "you shouldn't be walking on those feet yet." "They feel much better," Gabriella assured her, making her way carefully to an empty chair at the table. "And I'm tired of being confined to that room." Yates watched her progress with a mixture of concern and admiration, his gaze intense beneath the brim of his hat. "Stubborn woman," he muttered, though the quirk of his lips betrayed his approval. "I prefer determined," Gabriella replied, settling into the chair. "Now, what were you all discussing so seriously before I interrupted?" The 3 exchanged glances, clearly debating how much to share. "Might as well tell her," Samuel said finally. "She's involved whether we like it or not." Yates nodded, turning to Gabriella. "I'm riding to Timber Creek today to send that telegraph to the territorial governor. Samuel will stay here with you and Clara." "Alone?" Gabriella's alarm was immediate. "After what happened yesterday, daylight ride staying to main trails," Yates replied. "Less chance of an ambush that way. I'll be back before dark." "And if you're not," she pressed, unable to keep the fear from her voice. "Then Samuel knows what to do," Yates said simply. "Get you and Clara to safety." Gabriella looked between the 3 of them, seeing the resolve in their faces. These people, virtually strangers a week ago, were risking everything for her. The realization was both humbling and terrifying. "There must be another way," she said, desperation edging her voice. "Maybe if I went to Caldwell myself, told him I didn't see the men's faces clearly—" "No," Yates cut her off, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Caldwell isn't a man who leaves loose ends. The moment he knew you were alive, your life wouldn't be worth a Confederate dollar." "He's right, child," Clara added gently. "Men like Caldwell only understand one thing, power, and right now your testimony is the only power we have against him." Gabriella's shoulders slumped in defeat. They were right, of course. Caldwell would never let her live if he knew she could identify the men who'd attacked her family's homestead. "What does the telegraph say?" she asked finally. "To the governor. That we have a witness to murder and arson committed by men in Jeremiah Caldwell's employ," Yates explained. "That the local law enforcement is compromised, and we require immediate intervention from territorial authorities." "Will he respond?" Samuel snorted derisively. "Governor's a politician. He'll do whatever causes him the least trouble. Which is why I'm also contacting a friend at the Rocky Mountain News," Yates added. "Nothing motivates politicians like the threat of public scandal." Despite the gravity of the situation, Gabriella found herself smiling. "You've thought of everything." "I try," Yates replied, his own lips quirking upward. "Now eat your breakfast. You'll need your strength." As they ate, Gabriella observed the easy camaraderie between Yates, Samuel, and Clara, the familial bond that had formed between them over years of shared hardship and trust. She felt a pang of longing, remembering similar mornings around her parents' table, now lost forever. After breakfast, Yates prepared for his journey, checking his rifle and pistol, packing provisions into his saddlebags. Gabriella watched from the porch, anxiety gnawing at her stomach despite his reassurances. As he led his horse from the barn, she made her way carefully down the porch steps to meet him, determined to say a proper goodbye despite Clara's admonishments to stay off her feet. "You shouldn't be walking this far yet," Yates chided gently as she approached. "I needed to see you off properly," she replied, stopping before him. "To thank you for everything you're doing." He shook his head. "No need for thanks. I'm doing what any decent man would do." "We both know that's not true." Gabriella gathered her courage, placing a hand on his arm. "Please be careful, Yates. I couldn't bear it if something happened to you because of me." Something shifted in his gaze, a softening that made her heart skip. "I'll be back before you know it," he promised. "Just keep yourself safe until then." Acting on impulse, Gabriella rose on tiptoes, ignoring the twinge in her healing feet, and pressed a swift kiss to his cheek. "For luck," she whispered, drawing back with cheeks aflame. Yates stood frozen for a moment, surprise evident in his expression before it gave way to something warmer, more intense. His hand came up to touch the spot where her lips had been, a gesture so endearing it made Gabriella's breath catch. "That's better than any luck I've had in years," he said softly. Then, seemingly coming to himself, he cleared his throat and mounted his horse. "Remember, stay inside, keep the doors locked, and let Samuel handle any visitors." With a final nod to Gabriella, he urged his horse forward, riding out toward the east where Timber Creek lay a half-day's journey away. Gabriella watched until he disappeared from sight, her hand pressed against her heart as if to quiet its rapid beating. Only when Clara called from the porch did she turn back toward the cabin, her mind filled with prayers for Yates's safe return. The day crawled by with excruciating slowness. Clara kept Gabriella occupied with small tasks she could manage while seated mending, shelling peas for supper, even teaching her to knit with a spare set of needles. Samuel came and went, checking the property boundaries, his rifle always within reach. By late afternoon, Gabriella's nerves were stretched thin with waiting. "He should be back soon, shouldn't he?" she asked Clara for what felt like the 100th time. "If all went well in town, yes," Clara replied patiently, "but there could be any number of reasons for delay. The telegraph operator might not have been available right away. He might have had to wait for responses. Or he could simply be taking his time on the return journey to avoid trouble." Gabriella nodded, trying to take comfort in these reasonable explanations. Yet as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, casting long shadows across the yard, her anxiety only grew when Samuel entered the cabin just before dusk. His expression was grim. "Riders coming, 3 of them moving fast from the east," Clara's hand flew to her throat. "Mr. Blackwood?" Samuel shook his head. "Can't tell yet. Too far to make out faces." "What do we do?" Gabriella asked, rising from her chair despite the protest from her feet. "You two go to the root cellar," Samuel instructed, checking his rifle. "There's a trap door under the rug in the pantry. Stay there until I come for you, no matter what you hear." "Samuel," Clara began, her voice trembling. "No arguments, woman," he cut her off, though his tone was gentle. "I promised Mr. Blackwood I'd keep you safe, and that's what I aim to do." As Clara hurried to gather a few essentials, Samuel pulled Gabriella aside. "If something happens to me," he said in a low voice, "there's a tunnel from the root cellar that comes out behind the barn. Head west into the foothills. There's a line shack about 5 miles and you'll see the smoke from the chimney. Old trapper named Jenkins lives there. He's a friend." Gabriella nodded, committing the instructions to memory even as she prayed they wouldn't be necessary. "Be careful, Samuel." His weathered face creased in a brief smile. "Always am, Miss Gabriella. Now go, quickly." Clara led her to the pantry, pulling back a worn rug to reveal a trap door. With surprising strength for her age, she lifted it, revealing a ladder descending into darkness. "I'll go first," she whispered. "Mind your feet on the rungs." The root cellar was cool and earthy smelling, illuminated only by the lantern Clara had brought. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with preserved fruits and vegetables, sacks of flour and sugar and other provisions. A narrow cot stood against one wall, suggesting the space had been prepared for exactly this kind of emergency. "Samuel and Mr. Blackwood fixed this up last winter," Clara explained, seeing Gabriella's questioning look. "After that business with the Dawson gang over in Johnson County. Said it never hurt to have a bolt hole ready." They settled on the cot, straining to hear any sound from above. Minutes ticked by in tense silence, broken only by their breathing and the occasional creak of the house above them. Then came the sound they'd been dreading, the distant report of a rifle, followed by shouting and the crash of breaking glass. Clara reached for Gabriella's hand, gripping it tightly as more shots rang out. "Lord protect them," she whispered, her eyes closed in prayer. The skirmish seemed to last an eternity, though in reality it couldn't have been more than a few minutes. Then came an eerie silence, more terrifying than the gunfire had been. Footsteps moved across the floor above them, heavy boots searching systematically through the cabin. Gabriella held her breath as they entered the pantry, pausing directly over the trapdoor. "Nothing here," a gruff voice called. "Check the barn again. They've got to be somewhere." The footsteps receded and Gabriella exhaled shakily. "What about Samuel?" she whispered. Clara shook her head, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "We can't help him by getting ourselves caught. We wait, like he told us to." They sat in tense silence as more time passed, the lantern burning low. Just as Gabriella was beginning to think they should attempt the tunnel Samuel had mentioned, they heard the trapdoor creaking open. Clara extinguished the lantern immediately, plunging them into darkness. Gabriella's heart hammered against her ribs as footsteps descended the ladder. "Clara." "Miss Thorne," a familiar voice called softly. "Yates." Gabriella couldn't suppress her cry of relief. A match flared, illuminating his face, blood-streaked but whole. "It's safe now," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "They're gone." Clara relit the lantern, its glow revealing the full extent of Yates's disheveled appearance. His shirt was torn and bloodied, a fresh cut above his eyebrow dripping red down his temple. "Samuel?" Clara asked, her voice small. "Alive," Yates assured her. "Took a bullet in the shoulder, but I've seen him weather worse. He's in the cabin. I've sent for the doctor." As they climbed back to the main floor, Gabriella was shocked by the destruction that greeted them. Windows shattered, furniture overturned, bullet holes peppering the walls. Samuel lay on the sofa, his face gray with pain but his eyes alert as Clara rushed to his side. "What happened?" Gabriella asked, turning to Yates as he closed and barred the door behind them. "Ambush," he replied grimly. "They were waiting for me on the road back from Timber Creek. I managed to lose them in the hills, circle around home. Got here just as they were searching the place." His jaw tightened. "They won't be reporting back to Caldwell." The implication was clear, and Gabriella felt no remorse for the men who had threatened their lives. "Did you get the telegraph sent?" Yates nodded, moving to pour himself a measure of whiskey from a miraculously unbroken bottle. "Governor's sending a federal marshal. Should be here within the week." He downed the liquor in one swallow. "Also got word out to the newspaper. Story will run in tomorrow's edition." "So now we wait?" Gabriella asked, helping Clara tend to Samuel's wound. "Now we prepare," Yates corrected. "Caldwell won't take this lying down. When those men don't return, he'll know something's wrong. He'll come in force next time." The stark assessment sent a chill through Gabriella. "How many men does he have?" "At least a dozen on his payroll," Samuel supplied, wincing as Clara cleaned his wound. "Mean bastards, every one of them." "Language, Samuel," Clara scolded automatically, though without her usual vigor. "We can't hold off that many," Gabriella said, looking around at their small group: an injured man, an older woman, Yates, and herself with her still healing feet. "We won't have to," Yates replied, his expression determined. "Just need to hold out until the marshal arrives, and we won't be alone." At Gabriella's questioning look, he explained, "Sent word to some neighbors on my way back. Men who have had their own troubles with Caldwell. They'll be here by morning." Hope flared in Gabriella's chest, quickly tempered by guilt. "I've brought so much trouble to your door." Yates moved to her side, his hand finding hers in a gesture that was becoming wonderfully familiar. "You didn't bring this trouble, Gabriella. It was coming one way or another. Caldwell's been pushing for control of this valley for years. Sooner or later, someone had to stand against him." His fingers intertwined with hers, warm and reassuring. "Besides," he added softly, "some things are worth fighting for." The look in his eyes made her breath catch, a current of understanding passing between them that transcended the immediate danger. The moment was broken by a knock at the door, a particular pattern that made Yates relax slightly. "That'll be Doc Ellis," he said, moving to answer it. The doctor entered, taking in the scene with a professional's calm assessment. "Seems I missed all the excitement," he commented dryly, setting his bag on the table. "Let's see what we've got here." As the doctor tended to Samuel, Yates pulled Gabriella aside. "You should rest. Tomorrow we'll come early and we'll need everyone at their best." Gabriella nodded, suddenly aware of how exhausted she truly was. The day's events had drained her, physically and emotionally. "What about you?" "I'll keep watch," he replied. "Sleep isn't coming anytime soon anyway." Impulsively, she reached up to touch the cut above his eyebrow, her fingers gentle against his skin. "You should have this cleaned properly." His hand came up to capture hers, holding it against his cheek for a moment before releasing it. "I've had worse." "That doesn't mean you should neglect it," she countered. "Sit down and let me tend to it, at least." To her surprise, he complied without further argument, settling into a chair as she fetched clean water and a cloth. With careful movements, she cleaned the blood from his face, her touch as gentle as she could make it. "Thank you," he said quietly as she worked. "For staying, for being brave." Gabriella smiled softly. "I could say the same to you." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the chaos around them faded away. Despite the danger, despite the uncertainty of what tomorrow might bring, Gabriella felt a sense of rightness, of belonging, that she'd thought lost forever when her family's homestead burned. Here, in this damaged cabin with this wounded man, she had found something unexpected. a chance at a new beginning, and she was determined to fight for it with everything she had. Dawn broke with the arrival of Yates's neighbors, 7 men on horseback, grim-faced and well-armed. Gabriella watched from the porch as Yates greeted them, noting the respect in their demeanor, the way they listened intently as he outlined the situation. These were hard-working men. She realized ranchers and farmers who had built lives in this harsh territory through sheer determination. Men who, like Yates, had their own reasons to stand against Jeremiah Caldwell's expanding influence. "Miss Thorne," Yates called, gesturing her forward, "I'd like you to meet our allies." With as much dignity as her still tender feet allowed, Gabriella joined the group, meeting each man's gaze as Yates introduced them. They were a diverse bunch: a grizzled former mountain man named McAllister, twin brothers, the Hendersons, who ran a small horse ranch to the south, a Swedish immigrant called Larson with hands like sledgehammers, a soft-spoken Mexican vaquero introduced as Esteban, and 2 younger men, Wilkins and Ferguson, who worked a homestead together. "Miss Thorne is the witness I mentioned," Yates explained. "She saw Caldwell's men murder her parents and burn their homestead. Her testimony, along with what happened here yesterday, is what's bringing the federal marshal." "Brave woman," McAllister commented, his weathered face creasing in a respectful nod. "Standing against Caldwell takes courage, or desperation," Gabriella replied honestly. "I have nothing left to lose." "Except your life," Esteban observed quietly, "and yet you stay to see justice done." "That is courage, señorita, whether you recognize it or not." Warmth spread through Gabriella's chest at the unexpected praise. "Thank you all for coming. I know the risk you're taking." "Caldwell's been a thorn in all our sides for too long," one of the Henderson twins said, the other nodding in agreement. "Time someone pulled it out." "And time we stopped standing alone," Larson added, his accent thick but his meaning clear. "Together we are stronger." As the men dispersed to secure the property, setting up defensive positions, reinforcing windows, establishing a perimeter watch, Gabriella followed Yates back into the cabin. "They came," she said, unable to keep the wonder from her voice. "All of them, knowing what it might cost." "Good men generally do the right thing when called upon," Yates replied, checking his rifle, "especially when they've been waiting for the chance. How long do you think we have before Caldwell makes his move?" Yates's expression turned grim. "His men were due back last night." "He'll know something's wrong by now. I'd expect him before sundown." The Stark assessment sent a chill through Gabriella despite the morning's warmth. "And the marshal," telegram said, 2 days, possibly 3. He placed the rifle on the table, turning to face her fully. "Gabriella, there's still time for you to leave. Samuel's well enough to travel. He and Clara could take you into the high country. Wait this out." "No," she said firmly. "I'm done running, done hiding. This started because of me. It should end with me standing my ground." Pride and something deeper flashed in Yates's eyes. "I thought you might say that." He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small revolver. "It was my mother's. She carried it everywhere after the war." He held it out to her. "Do you know how to use it?" Gabriella took the weapon, feeling its weight, familiar with its mechanics from her father's teachings. "Yes. It's a last resort," Yates cautioned. "If everything goes wrong, if they get past us." He couldn't finish the sentence. "I understand," she said quietly, tucking the revolver into the pocket of her dress. "But it won't come to that. I believe in you, in all of you." Yates's hand rose to cup her cheek, his calloused palm warm against her skin. "Gabriella Thorne, you are the most remarkable woman I have ever known." Before she could respond, he leaned forward, his lips meeting hers in a kiss so gentle it brought tears to her eyes. Unlike their previous moments of connection, there was nothing hurried about this one, no interruption imminent. It was a declaration, a promise, a moment stolen from the uncertainty that surrounded them. When they finally parted, Gabriella kept her eyes closed for a moment, savoring the sensation, committing it to memory. "Was that goodbye?" she whispered, her voice unsteady. "No," Yates replied with quiet certainty. "That was a beginning." The day progressed with tense anticipation, each hour that passed without incident only increasing the sense that Caldwell's response was building, gathering like a storm on the horizon. The men took shifts watching the approaches to the ranch, while Clara prepared food and Gabriella helped Samuel clean and load every firearm on the property. By mid-afternoon, the waiting had become nearly unbearable. Gabriella found herself jumping at every sound, her nerves stretched to breaking point. She was in the kitchen, helping Clara preserve the last of the summer vegetables, an incongruously normal task given the circumstances, when the alarm was finally raised. Riders coming. Wilkins called from his position at the north window. At least 15, moving fast from the east. Yates appeared in the doorway, his expression focused, controlled. "Clara, Gabriella to the root cellar now." "I'm staying," Gabriella countered, reaching for the revolver in her pocket. "I can shoot if needed." "Gabriella," Yates began, his tone warning. "She's right," Samuel interrupted, rising from his chair despite his injured shoulder. "We need every hand, and she has more right than any of us to face Caldwell." A tense moment passed as Yates considered this, clearly torn between protecting Gabriella and acknowledging her right to stand with them. Finally, he nodded. "Stay behind the barricade with Clara. Only shoot if they breach the house." Gabriella moved to his side, her hand finding his arm. "Be careful." The ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Always am." As the defenders took their positions, the Henderson twins and McAllister at the barn, Larson and Ferguson at the north side of the house, Esteban and Wilkins covering the south approach, with Yates and Samuel at the front, Gabriella and Clara crouched behind an overturned table in the main room. Both armed, both terrified but determined. The riders approached in a cloud of dust, spreading out to surround the property. At their head rode a man Gabriella had never seen but instantly recognized from descriptions. Jeremiah Caldwell himself, a tall figure on a magnificent chestnut stallion, his black coat, and had a stark contrast to the dusty landscape. They halted just beyond rifle range, and Caldwell's voice carried clearly across the distance. "Blackwood, I know you're in there. Send out the Thorne girl and we'll leave your ranch standing." Yates stepped onto the porch, rifle held ready but not aimed. "The lady isn't going anywhere, Caldwell. Neither are the federal marshals on their way to hear her testimony about what your men did to her family." Even from a distance, Gabriella could see Caldwell's posture stiffen. "You're bluffing. No marshal would come out here on the word of some hysterical female." "The Telegraph says otherwise," Yates replied coolly. "As does the story running in today's Rocky Mountain News. Your days of operating above the law are over, Caldwell." A murmur ran through Caldwell's men, several exchanging uneasy glances. Ruling through intimidation was one thing, facing federal charges was quite another. "You have one chance, Blackwood," Caldwell called, his voice hard with barely contained rage. "Give us the girl and you all walk away. Fight us and none of you will live to see sundown." "That's not going to happen," Yates responded. "She's under my protection now." Something in those words, the absolute certainty, the personal claim, sent warmth spreading through Gabriella's chest despite the dire circumstances. Caldwell's laugh was cold. "Your protection? You and what army, rancher?" As if on cue, rifles appeared at every window and defensive position around the property, the click of hammers being cocked clearly audible in the tense silence. "This one," Yates replied simply. "Last chance, Caldwell, ride away. Wait for the marshal to sort this out properly." For a moment, it seemed Caldwell might actually consider the offer. Then his face contorted with rage. "Kill them all," he shouted, spurring his horse forward as his men followed suit. The air erupted with gunfire, the defenders picking their targets with practiced precision. 2 of Caldwell's men fell immediately, others reeling in their saddles as bullets found their marks. But the attackers had numbers on their side, and they pressed forward relentlessly. Gabriella watched in horror as the battle unfolded, her hands white-knuckled around the small revolver. Clara muttered prayers beside her, her own shotgun ready but unfired. Through the chaos, Gabriella tracked Yates's movements as he fired, reloaded, fired again, his face a mask of concentration. Samuel beside him, despite his injury, was equally focused, each shot deliberate and effective. The first wave of attackers was repelled, but they regrouped quickly, taking cover behind rocks and outbuildings. A new volley of shots peppered the house, shattering what few intact windows remained. Glass sprayed across the floor as Gabriella and Clara ducked lower behind their barricade. "They're moving around to the back," McAllister shouted from his position. Yates's response was immediate. "Esteban, Wilkins, shift to the rear door." The battle continued, minutes stretching into what felt like hours. Ammunition began to run low, and Gabriella could see the strain on the defenders' faces as they fought to hold their positions. A cry of pain announced that one of their number had been hit. Ferguson, clutching his leg as he collapsed behind the water trough. Then came the sound they'd all been dreading. Hoofbeats approaching the front porch, the crash of the door as someone attempted to break through. "Gabriella, get down," Yates shouted, swinging his rifle toward the entrance. The door splintered inward and Jesse Tucker himself burst through, pistol raised. Yates fired, but his rifle clicked empty. In that moment of vulnerability, Tucker's gun swung toward him. Without conscious thought, Gabriella raised her revolver and pulled the trigger. The report was deafening in the confined space, the recoil stronger than she'd expected. Tucker staggered, a look of surprise crossing his face as red bloomed across his chest. He crumpled to the floor, his pistol clattering uselessly beside him. Silence fell, broken only by the sound of retreating hoofbeats as the remaining attackers fled, their courage deserting them with Tucker's fall. Yates was at Gabriella's side in an instant, his arm around her shoulders as she stared at the man she'd killed, the man who had ordered her parents' murder, who had tried to kill the person she'd come to care for most in the world. "He was going to shoot you," she whispered, the revolver still clutched in her trembling hand. "I know," Yates replied gently, easing the weapon from her grasp. "You saved my life, Gabriella." She turned to him then, burying her face against his chest as delayed shock overtook her. His arms encircled her, strong and steady as she shook with silent sobs. "It's over," he murmured against her hair. "It's over now." But they both knew it wasn't quite true. Caldwell had escaped, and while his force had been depleted, he remained a threat. The battle had been won, but the war wouldn't truly end until the marshal arrived. As the defenders regrouped, tending to wounds and reinforcing their positions in case of another attack, Gabriella remained at Yates's side, drawing strength from his presence even as she offered her own in return. Night fell, bringing with it a tense, watchful calm. Ferguson's leg wound had been cleaned and bandaged, not serious enough to threaten his life but painful nonetheless. The others had sustained only minor injuries, cuts and bruises, nothing that would keep them from standing their posts. Tucker's body had been removed to the barn, covered with a tarp until proper authorities could deal with it. Gabriella couldn't bring herself to look at it again. though she felt no remorse for what she'd done. Some actions, she was learning, were necessary, no matter how difficult. As darkness deepened, Yates found her on the porch staring out at the star-filled sky. He draped a blanket around her shoulders, his touch lingering. "You should try to rest," he said softly. "We've doubled the watch. If Caldwell returns, we'll have warning." Gabriella nodded, though sleep seemed an impossible prospect with her mind still racing, her body humming with residual tension. "Do you think he will return?" "Not tonight," Yates replied, leaning against the porch railing beside her. "He'll need to regroup, consider his options. And he lost at least 5 men today that will make others think twice about following him into another fight. What happens when the marshal arrives? Justice, I hope." Yates's gaze was distant, focused on the darkened landscape. "Your testimony about your parents' murder. What happened here today? It should be enough to bring charges against Caldwell, maybe even send him to prison." "And after that?" Gabriella asked, the question encompassing so much more than the immediate future. Yates turned to her then, his expression softening. "After that, I was hoping you might consider staying here with me." The directness of the proposal, for that was what it was, beneath the careful wording, took Gabriella's breath away. "Yates, I know it's sudden," he continued quickly. "We've known each other barely 2 weeks. But in that time you've become essential to me, Gabriella. I can't imagine this place without you in it." Tears pricked at her eyes, not of sorrow but of a joy so unexpected, so complete, it overwhelmed her. "I have nothing to offer," she whispered. "No dowry, no family connections, just myself." "That's all I want," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "Just you, Gabriella Thorne, with your courage and your determination and your heart." He took her hand, his fingers warm against hers. "I've been half alive since the war, just existing. Then I found you in the dust, and something woke up inside me that I thought was dead forever." Gabriella's free hand rose to touch his face, tracing the line of his jaw with tender fingers. "I felt the same way after losing my parents. Like I was just a shell, moving forward because I didn't know what else to do." Her voice softened. "Until you lifted me from the ground and called me yours to protect. In that moment, even half-conscious, I felt safe, seen, like maybe there was still something worth living for." "Is that a yes?" Yates asked, a hint of vulnerability in his eyes that made her heart ache with tenderness. In response, Gabriella rose on tiptoes, ignoring the twinge in her healing feet, and pressed her lips to his in a kiss that was answer enough. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer as the kiss deepened, a promise exchanged without words. When they finally parted, both breathless, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Gabriella Thorne. I think I have since the moment I found you." "And I love you, Yates Blackwood," she replied, the words feeling right, true, as if they'd been waiting to be spoken all along. "With all that I am, with all that I have left to give." They stood together on the porch, holding each other as the night deepened around them, finding peace in the midst of uncertainty, hope in the aftermath of violence. Whatever came next, Caldwell's justice, rebuilding what had been damaged, creating a life together, they would face it as they stood now. Together, stronger for having found each other in the vast wilderness of the Wyoming Territory. The federal marshal arrived at dawn 2 days later, accompanied by 6 deputies and a journalist from the Rocky Mountain News. By then, word had spread throughout the county of the standoff at Blackwood Ranch, of how a coalition of small ranchers had successfully defended against Jeremiah Caldwell's hired guns. Marshal James Harrington was a tall, imposing figure with a reputation for incorruptibility that had made him both respected and feared throughout the territories. He listened with grave attention as Gabriella recounted the attack on her family's homestead, the murder of her parents, her desperate flight across the plains, and her rescue by Yates. "You're certain it was Caldwell's men?" the marshal asked, his piercing gaze assessing her credibility. "Absolutely certain," Gabriella confirmed. "I recognize Jesse Tucker giving the orders. He's the same man who led the attack here 2 days ago." She gestured toward the barn where Tucker's body still lay, awaiting official disposition. "The one who died during the fight." The marshal nodded, making notes in a small book. "And the others? Could you identify them if you saw them again?" "2 of them, yes. They weren't wearing masks during the attack on my home." "That's a start," Harrington said, closing his notebook. "Combined with the accounts of what happened here, and statements from your neighbors about Caldwell's previous intimidation tactics, we have enough to bring him in for questioning at minimum." "At minimum?" Yates questioned, his voice sharp with disbelief. "Marshal, he ordered the murder of innocent homesteaders. He sent armed men to attack a private ranch. Surely that warrants more than questioning." Harrington's expression remained impassive. "I understand your frustration, Mr. Blackwood, but we do things by the book. Caldwell has powerful friends in the territorial government. We need an airtight case." "And what about our safety in the meantime?" Gabriella asked. "Caldwell is still out there, and he knows I can testify against him. That's why I'm leaving 2 deputies here until this is resolved," the marshal replied. "And why I'd like you to consider coming to Cheyenne, Miss Thorne. We can offer better protection there while we build our case." Gabriella's hand found Yates's, fingers intertwining automatically. "My place is here now, Marshal, but I'll cooperate in any way necessary to see justice done." Harrington's gaze shifted between them, noting their clasped hands, the protective way Yates stood beside her. A hint of a smile touched his stern features. "I see. Well, the deputies will remain regardless, and I'll expect both of you in Cheyenne when the time comes for formal statements." After taking statements from the others who had participated in the defense of the ranch, the marshal and 4 of his deputies departed, heading toward Caldwell's property with warrants for his arrest, and the arrest of the men identified as participants in the attacks. The journalist, a young man named Phillips, lingered to ask additional questions, his enthusiasm for the story evident in his rapid note-taking and eager expression. "This will make the front page," he assured them. A brutal land baron thwarted by brave homesteaders, a woman avenging her murdered parents. It's the kind of story people back east can't get enough of. "We're not interested in becoming folk heroes," Yates said dryly, "just in seeing justice done." Of course," Phillips agreed, though his scribbling never ceased. "But surely you see the broader implications. This could change how business is conducted throughout the territories. Show that the common man and woman can stand against corruption and win." Gabriella couldn't help but smile at his idealism. "I hope you're right, Mr. Phillips. This territory has seen enough violence and intimidation." As the journalist finally departed, Yates wrapped an arm around Gabriella's shoulders, drawing her against his side. "How are you holding up?" "Tired," she admitted, relieved it's finally in official hands, but mostly. She looked up at him, her eyes soft with emotion. "Mostly I'm thinking about the future, our future." His smile was tender as he brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I like the sound of that, our future." The following weeks brought significant changes to Blackwood Ranch and the surrounding county. Jeremiah Caldwell was arrested, along with several of his men, and transported to Cheyenne to await trial. With their leader behind bars, the remaining members of his organization quickly dispersed, many leaving the territory entirely. Word of the standoff spread throughout Wyoming and beyond, drawing attention to the practices that had allowed men like Caldwell to operate unchecked for so long. The territorial governor, under pressure from both public opinion and federal authorities, appointed a special committee to investigate corruption among local officials. For Gabriella and Yates, life gradually settled into a new rhythm. With Clara's guidance, Gabriella took over management of the household, learning the particular challenges of running a ranch. Her feet healed completely, allowing her to explore the property fully, to ride alongside Yates as he checked fences and cattle, to begin making the place truly her own. Their wedding took place 6 weeks after the standoff, a simple ceremony performed by the circuit preacher in the newly repaired main room of the cabin. The neighbors who had stood with them against Caldwell gathered to witness their vows, along with a few townspeople from Timber Creek who had heard their story and wanted to show support. Gabriella wore a dress of pale blue silk, ordered from Denver at Clara's insistence. Every bride deserves something special, the older woman had declared, brooking no argument about the expense. As Yates slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, his mother's, saved from the loss of his family's Texas ranch, Gabriella felt a sense of completion, of having come full circle from the desperate woman who had walked until her legs gave out on the Wyoming plains. I, Yates Blackwood, take you, Gabriella Thorne, to be my lawfully wedded wife, he recited, his voice steady with conviction. To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. As she repeated the vows, Gabriella's voice trembled with emotion, her eyes never leaving his. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, the cheer that went up from their assembled friends seemed to shake the very rafters of the cabin. Later, as lanterns glowed against the gathering dusk and fiddle music filled the night air, Yates led Gabriella away from the celebration to the quiet of the porch. From there, they could see the lights of the party, but were granted a moment of privacy in the midst of the joyful chaos. "Happy, Mrs. Blackwood?" Yates asked, his arms encircling her waist from behind as they gazed out at the star-filled sky. The name sent a thrill through Gabriella, still new enough to feel like a precious gift. "More than I ever thought possible again," she replied honestly, leaning back against his solid strength. "After losing everything I never imagined I could find, this, a home, a family, love." His lips brushed the sensitive spot just below her ear. "I felt the same way. Like the best parts of life were behind me, and all that remained was going through the motions." His arms tightened around her. "Until I found you." Gabriella turned in his embrace, reaching up to trace the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. "Do you think we would have found each other anyway? If not for what happened at my parents' farm, I believe we would," Yates replied without hesitation. "Some things are meant to be, Gabriella. Some souls are meant to find each other, no matter what path they have to take to get there." The conviction in his voice brought tears to her eyes. "I wish my parents could have known you, could have seen how happy you make me." "I think they know," he said softly, brushing away a tear that had escaped to trail down her cheek. "And I think they would approve of their daughter finding her strength, her voice, her place in the world." "Our place," she corrected gently. "Our world." His smile was tender as he lowered his lips to hers, a kiss that sealed their bond, their promise, their shared future stretching out before them like the vast Wyoming sky. The trial of Jeremiah Caldwell became a landmark case in Wyoming Territory's history, setting precedents for how land disputes and corporate interests would be handled in the developing West. Gabriella's testimony, along with that of other homesteaders who had suffered similar intimidation, proved damning. Caldwell was sentenced to 15 years in the territorial prison, effectively ending his reign of terror, In the aftermath, life at Blackwood Ranch flourished. With the threat removed, Yates was able to focus on expanding their operations, acquiring additional grazing land that Caldwell had previously controlled. Samuel's shoulder healed completely, and he took on a more supervisory role, training younger hands as the ranch grew. Clara, delighted to have another woman in the household, became the mother figure Gabriella had lost, teaching her the skills needed to manage a growing ranch, sharing wisdom accumulated over a lifetime of frontier living. Their relationship deepened into one of mutual respect and genuine affection, filling a void in both their lives. A year after their wedding, as spring brought new life to the land, Gabriella shared news that completed their happiness. She was expecting their first child. Yates's reaction stunned joy, giving way to tender protectiveness, confirmed what she already knew. He would be an exceptional father. Their daughter, Eleanor Claire Blackwood, was born on a crisp autumn morning, her lusty cries announcing her arrival to a world that had been eagerly awaiting her. With her father's blue eyes and her mother's golden hair, she was a perfect blend of them both and utterly her own person from the first breath. As Gabriella watched Yates cradle their newborn daughter with hands that could break a wild horse, yet touch the infant with such delicate care, she was overcome with gratitude for the journey that had brought them to this moment. From desperate flight to miraculous rescue, from healing to love, from danger to triumph, every step had led here, to this family they had created together. On Eleanor's first birthday, they gathered on the porch at sunset, the baby balanced on Yates's hip as Gabriella leaned against his side. The ranch spread out before them, cattle grazing peacefully in the distance, the cabin enlarged now to accommodate their growing family. "Look at what we've built," Gabriella murmured, her head resting on her husband's shoulder as she surveyed their domain. "Not just the ranch, but this life. This family." "From the darkest beginnings," Yates agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Though I maintain finding you was the luckiest day of my life." Eleanor gurgled happily, reaching for her mother with chubby hands. As Gabriella took her daughter, settling the child against her chest, she reflected on the long journey that had led to this moment of perfect contentment. She had walked until her legs gave out, her body surrendering to despair and exhaustion. And then a cowboy had lifted her gently, called her his to protect, and in doing so, offered her not just safety but a future brighter than any she could have imagined. Life on the frontier would never be easy. There would always be challenges, hardships, moments of fear and uncertainty. But facing them together, building something lasting in this wild land, creating a legacy for their daughter and the children who might follow this was what it meant to truly live, to transform survival into thriving. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Yates slipped his arm around Gabriella's waist, drawing her and their daughter close. "I love you, Mrs. Blackwood," he murmured against her hair, "today and always." "And I love you," she replied, turning her face up to his for a kiss that held all the promise of their shared tomorrows. "My rescuer, my protector, my heart." The darkness gathered around them, but they were not afraid. They had found in each other a light that neither hardship nor time could diminish, a love born in desperation but nurtured in hope. A bond forged in the crucible of the Wyoming wilderness that would endure for all their days.